Welcome back. Let's take a look at that market picture now. And world share markets were headed for their worst week since the depths of the 2008 financial crisis. And this comes as investors ditched risky assets on fears that the coronavirus would become a pandemic and thus trigger what is a global recession. Now, Japan's Nikkei managed to slip 3.7% on rising fears that even the Olympics that were planned for July to August, that is, may be called off due to that virus. The market there is now slumping more than 10% for the week alone. Japan's Nikkei closed the trading day down at 21,142 points. The Hang Seng was 2.5% weak as well by close, while the Shanghai Composite fell off 3.7%. Over to the United States now. Well, it seems that Wall Street's main indices were plunged last night in their sixth straight session of declines, with the S&P 500 confirming its fastest correction in history as the rapid global spread of COVID-19 intensified investor worries about economic growth. The Dow Jones Industrial falling off there 4.4%. That's 25,766. The S&P 500 losing a similar margin, 4.43%, 2,978, with the Nasdaq Composite dropping off 4.6%, 8,566 points. Let's head on over now to the European markets and even the local market and really see how things are faring there. Negativity will certainly reign supreme, considering that the COVID-19 epidemic is becoming a fear across the globe. Italy, yes, maintaining its stance as having the most number of cases outside of China, but it is certainly growing in other regions as well. And that has put a whole lot of fear for investors in European markets in particular. On the local front as well, we are getting that sense of negativity. So the JSE All Share locally has also dipped down today, 51,677. Massive falls. When we had seen the JSE perhaps head towards 58,000 points, that's fallen off completely. So a big drawdown there. Industrials and financials following suit as well. Some of the stocks that have certainly been safe havens have been the gold shares, but today, unfortunately, not able to pick themselves up. They are sitting above that 3,000 point mark, though, with resources and platinum shares also sitting in negative territory. Quick look then at the commodities themselves. Well, gold continues to head higher. 1,600 is where it currently sits. Just how far along will it go, though, is perhaps the question. But even that is a little dampened today. Platinum 914 and continuously going lower, even sitting at around 887 at some stage earlier this morning. It's $52.51 a barrel for Brent crude. That at some stage was sitting at $50. And if that continues to stay that way, of course, it does change the way we will look at the petrol price later this month as well, and going into next month then. Over to the currencies then. The big one here is indeed the British pound going above that 20 Rand mark for a British pound, so that's certainly going to hurt. 15.60 for a US dollar, so continued weakness there, and 17.21 for a euro as well. Over to the BRICS currencies, well, they sit marginally flat across the board there, with a tinge of red really, which is keeping them mostly unmoved for the most part. Let's head on over to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange now, where Chantal Marx is standing by then. Of course, she's from FNB Wealth and Investment. Chantal, thank you so much for the time. So it is negative stances across the globe. No real surprise, I suppose. The question becomes, though, is does the sell-off stop at any point in time? And what would that point be?
So it's important. It's pretty much impossible to catch a falling knife. So we can't predict exactly when it will end. I guess the end will come after the market and investors and people generally across the world is convinced that this coronavirus story is contained, that it really isn't as dangerous as people assume, and that it really needs to stop spreading, or at least the infection rate needs to start slowing. Yeah,
I suppose then you beg the question as to if it doesn't keep slowing, or if it keeps on going at this rate, how far along do markets decline? And I guess how long is a piece of string then in that case? But you end up seeing places, or rather elements like gold, not being safe havens anymore today. Is that a bit of a worry? And I mean, why isn't that perhaps headed higher today?
Yeah, I mean, I was asking myself the same question this morning, and then when I started thinking about that, I realized that gold has a few sources of demand. So you have the investment demand for gold, which is usually viewed as a safe haven asset. So when other asset prices go down, gold tends to go up. That we saw in the beginning, but what has really happened here is that there's a threat of supply chain disruption, as well as a threat of demand for gold as an industrial use and as an everyday use, as a consumer commodity, coming under pressure because of the outbreak of the coronavirus. So presumably there would be less demand for gold jewelry, for example, in China and in Asian nations, where we know gold demand in that way is basically being carried. For the miners, the supply chain story becomes even more of a nightmare, because even though they'll be able to get the gold out of the ground, they may not actually be able to export it. And that's kind of why you've seen miners drop in excess even of the gold price.
Yeah, sure. Certainly does tell you the story there. Speaking of mining, then we have interim results coming out today of two miners, that is. Let's go to the diversified miner, African Rainbow Minerals there. I got to chat to the CEO a little bit earlier today, and he still seems very buoyant, even though headline earnings didn't go up much. He did have a revenue figure go up by 31%. How do you feel about that company?
So African Rainbow Minerals is actually one of the cheapest among the diversified miners if you look at it purely on a relative basis. I think the problem for African Rainbow Minerals specifically, and the reason why they haven't been able to grow earnings as quickly as the other diversifieds, is the fact that they're heavily exposed to coal, and coal prices really haven't been doing well, particularly thermal coal, which is where the biggest part of their income lies. So because coal prices are lower, they probably did okay in terms of increasing production, but you will have an issue with margins. So the coal business specifically made quite a substantial headline loss, and that dragged on the rest of the results. Their platinum business did exceptionally well, exactly how the rest of the platinum players did. So it really is just that one commodity that's a drag on African Rainbow Minerals. I guess the positive thing is that it is becoming smaller from a basket perspective, just because it is moving backwards and because prices are so low, and also because both platinum and iron ore is doing so well.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the one that did really well, platinum is certainly helping the likes of Northern Platinum, who put out their interims as well today.
Yes, that was an excellent set of results. Revenue didn't grow by as much as expected because they had new concentrators coming online, which means their refined production was a little bit lower than actual mining production, and as a result they weren't able to sell as much. But that just means that there's an inventory build-up, so over the next few periods they will be able to offload some of that product, and that should bode well for future periods. The business has been doing exceptionally well. It's probably one of our favorite counters within that platinum mining space. They're going to benefit from everything that everyone else is going to benefit from, being a weaker rand and higher PGM prices, but they're also buying back their own preference shares, which should be accretive for ordinary shareholders.
Yeah. Very quickly then, Chantal, 20 rand for a pound? What happened there?
Yeah, I mean, the South African rand is just being sold off in line with all other emerging market currencies. I mean, as you said at the beginning of the show, relative to the BRICS currencies, our currency is actually quite flat. It's just depreciated a lot against developed market currencies. So obviously the pound being a developed market currency and probably also being viewed as a safe haven currency, probably not as much as the US dollar and the Swiss franc, and the euro for that matter, it still does benefit when there are bouts of risk off.
Fantastic. Chantal, always good catching up with you. Thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. FNB Wealth and Investments, Chantal Marx, they're joining us live from the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Well, that is where the buck stops for me.